I received a great question in response to my inflation video from the other day, and it had something to do with would the $1.7 trillion omnibus spending bill have an impact on inflation? And it's a great question. This is actually a topic that's discussed quite frequently, and there's some disagreement. Government spending is not inflationary per se, right? It has to do more with how the spending is funded. So if the government spends money it doesn't have and runs a deficit, that money has to be borrowed from somewhere. So if the Federal Reserve is printing money and buying treasuries, effectively loaning that new money to the federal government, and the government is spending it into the economy, then that would be inflationary because it's increasing the money supply. If, however, the Federal Reserve is not funding that spending and it's instead being borrowed from private households, corporations, foreign governments, in that case, it's just borrowing, the federal government is borrowing cash that already exists in the system, and cash is just transferring between different account holders, essentially. So there's no new money being created as a result of that spending and borrowing. Okay? There's a couple caveats to this, though. One is if the spending makes the private sector less efficient, meaning less productive, that could reduce the supply of economic goods available. So even if the money supply stays constant, if the amount of goods available in the economy are lower, then there's the same amount of money chasing fewer goods. That's potentially inflationary. Another thing is longer term down the road, that deficit spending has to be either paid down or continue to be rolled over as the federal government refinances its debts. So it spends money it doesn't have, it borrows that debt comes due, and then the federal government either has to pay that debt or just roll it over into a new loan. We know the federal government doesn't really pay down debt, it just keeps on taking more and more. The way that's working is in the future, there either has to be more borrowing from the private sector to roll that debt over, or the Federal Reserve, again, is going to step in, print money, and make those loans to the federal government, in which case new money supply is being created. Another way in which government spending can increase inflation over longer periods of time is if it's hijacking resources from the private sector. So if the government is spending so much that so much money is being allocated to the federal government and away from the private sector, obviously that would be making the private sector less productive. There's less money available for investment into the private sector. And so that could hurt growth and increase inflation over long periods of time.